Her voice didn't just echo in the kitchen. It cut through something much deeper inside me. I stood there, one hand still gripping my phone, the message from the hospital glowing on the screen. My mother, Eleanor Whitfield, had been admitted overnight. The words critical observation sat in my chest like a weight I couldn't move. And my wife, Victoria Harrington, stood across from me like this was a negotiation. Like my mother's life was a variable she could remove from the equation. Say that again, I said quietly. She didn't hesitate. I'm not living with her again, Carter. Her tone was sharp, controlled, almost rehearsed. It's her or me. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything I hadn't said for years. Because this wasn't just about today. This wasn't just about a hospital call. This was about everything that had been building between the woman I married and the woman who raised me. Let me take you back for a second. 3 years ago, my mother moved in with us after my father passed. She didn't want to, but she didn't have a choice. The house felt too big, too quiet, too heavy with memories. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. Thanks. Victoria agreed. At least, that's what she said at the time. But agreement and acceptance are two very different things. At first, it was small things. Comments about how Mom arranged the kitchen. Little sighs when Mom joined us for dinner. Then it became colder, more distant. Victoria would go quiet whenever Mom entered the room. She stopped asking her anything, stopped acknowledging her entirely. And my mother, being who she was, never complained. She would smile. She would say, "It's all right, Carter." But I could see it. I could feel it. That slow, invisible fracture forming inside our home. Eventually, Victoria pushed for Mom to move out. Said we needed our space. Said our marriage needed room to breathe. And I agreed. That's the part one don't like admitting. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself Mom would be okay. She moved into a small apartment across town. She said she liked the independence. But independence isn't the same as being wanted. And now, standing in my kitchen, hearing my wife say those words, I realized exactly what I had allowed to happen. Let me ask you something. If you were standing where I was, would you try to keep the peace, or would you finally draw a line? I took a slow breath. She's in the hospital, Victoria. I heard you, she said. And I'm telling you I won't go back to living like that. Living like what? Like I'm second in my own home. The words hit harder than I expected. Because for the first time, I wasn't just hearing anger. I was hearing something else. Resentment. Deep, buried resentment. You think my mother made you second? I asked. She didn't have to try, Victoria replied. You made her first every time. That stopped me. Not because I agreed, but because part of me wondered if she believed that completely. Or if she needed to. Victoria, I said carefully, she's alone. And what about me? You're not alone. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Really, that was the moment I realized something had already broken long before this argument. We weren't talking about my mother anymore. We were talking about us. But the hospital didn't care about our marriage. My mother didn't have time for unresolved tension. I'm going to see her, I said. Victoria's expression hardened instantly. If you walk out that door and bring her back into our lives, don't come back. Il stared at her. Really stared this time. At the woman I had built a life with. At the person who once held my hand and promised we'd face everything together. And suddenly, I couldn't recognize her. Or maybe I finally could. I grabbed my keys, and I walked out. The drive to the hospital felt longer than it should have. Every red light felt like a test of patience I didn't have. When I finally reached the room, I paused at the door. Because part of me was afraid. Afraid of what I'd see. Afraid of what I'd feel. But when I stepped inside, my mother looked smaller. That's the only way I can describe it. Smaller than I remembered. Smaller than she should have been. Her eyes lit up when she saw me. Carter. Just my name. No questions. No accusations. Just relief. I walked over and took her hand. And that's when I noticed it. The nurse standing in the corner. Watching me with a strange, knowing expression. Mr. Whitfield, she said gently, your mother asked for you earlier. I came as soon as I could. The nurse hesitated. Then she said something that shifted everything. She almost didn't want us to call you. I frowned. What do you mean? She said she didn't want to cause problems in your marriage. The room went quiet again. But this silence was different. This one hurt, because suddenly every decision I thought I made for balance, every compromise I told myself was reasonable, looked completely different. My mother wasn't just staying out of the way. She was removing herself entirely. For me, for my life, for my marriage. And I had let her. That was the moment everything changed. Not in a dramatic way, not in a loud, explosive way, but in a quiet, irreversible way. I stayed with her for hours. We talked. We laughed softly. And at one point, she squeezed my hand and said, "You don't have to choose, Carter." But the truth was, I already had. I just hadn't admitted it yet. When I got back home that night, the house felt colder than ever. Victoria was sitting in the living room, waiting. "Well," she asked. I didn't rush to answer. I walked in slowly, set my keys down, and then I said it. "She comes home with me tomorrow." Victoria stood up immediately. Her face went pale. "You're serious?" "Yes." "Then we're done." I nodded, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something unexpected. Not fear, not panic, clarity. "I think we've been done for a while," I said quietly. She stared at me like she didn't recognize me anymore. Maybe she didn't, because the man who stood in front of her that night wasn't the same man who kept choosing silence over truth. She didn't argue. She didn't yell. She just turned and walked upstairs. And that was it. No dramatic ending. No shouting match. Just the quiet collapse of something that had already been broken. The next day, I brought my mother home. Not into the same house. Because some things, once broken, don't need to be repaired. They need to be released. I moved into a smaller place. Closer to the hospital. Closer to what actually mattered. And for the first time in years, it felt like I was finally living honestly. Let me ask you something. Would you have made the same choice? Or would you have held on longer to something that was already slipping away? Because sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that reveal what should have been obvious all along. What's your personal reflection? Would you have chosen your marriage or stood by your parent when everything was on the line?